Welcome to SCAL6, My Favorite Things, Part 4, Editing. This video presents 7 of my favorite editing capabilities in Klic-N-Kut. But before I get started, I want to stress that editing and designing, in my mind, have always been different. Designing is when you use a tool to make something quite different from the original, such as, I don't know, a rhinestone design or adding a 3D shadow or generating copies along a circle or to fit some other path. And there are dozens more in Klic-N-Kut. Editing, on the other hand, to me, modifies an existing shape for a particular purpose, such as fixing a problem, changing how a design will cut, or perhaps an intermediate step required before taking the original shape and before you can use it in designing something. Finally, editing and designing often overlap. As you watch some of the examples, you may feel that something I show is designing and not editing. I'm not going to argue the point. Again, there's a lot of overlap between the two. Okay, I want to start out with talking about the blackout function. So let's say I'm going to do a print and cut of this particular design, and when I click on preview, I can see that there are internal cut lines. Okay, and by the way, when you use this window, always turn on show cut lines, and it's helpful if you turn off show printable so you can just make absolutely sure you're seeing all of the cut lines that are there. So, but simple. Let's say I just want the outside, I don't want the inside. Well, I come right over, select the cut layer right here, open up your group, and then on the style panel, change from normal to blackout. And then when you come to preview, you'll see that it basically just hides everything that's an internal cut line. Now, the nice thing about the style panel is, remember, nothing's permanent, so I can always go back, the style can always go back to normal, all right? And then when I do that, then those lines are back. Okay, so it's not, that's one of the things I like about shortcuts a lot, is some of the functions are not destructive. They're just things you can turn on or off. So this is one of them. Now, in some cases, you may not want to totally erase anything that's on the inside, so blackout wouldn't work. So in this case, I've imported this dragon, and when I click on the preview, I can look at this and I say, well, first of all, what are all these little specks? I don't want those there because they're going to cut, and that's going to be annoying to have that little tap, 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 especially if I have multiples of these that I'm cutting out. The other thing is I say, well, you know what, maybe I want to keep this large shape here and maybe get rid of this one here. I mean, it's all up to you what you want to cut or not cut. But this is where blackout's not going to apply because of the fact that you don't want this, say, for example, these larger shapes to be eliminated. So instead, we're going to use the eraser function. And to use the eraser function, I always recommend, you don't always have to, it can work without it, but I usually recommend you select your cut layer, right-click, copy, right-click, paste in place so that you have one to work with, and then hide this, select just your cut layer, and then give it a color on the fill and stroke panel. The reason I recommend this is because sometimes when I've been trying to just edit the cut layer, for some reason the print layer just gets wiped out, and I swear I didn't do it myself. It's just something that happens. So that's one of the reasons I make that copy. So then over here on the tools panel, you can select the eraser tool, select the appropriate size, that might be a little bit too big, and then you can just click to delete anything that you don't want to cut. Okay, and then right here you can make a choice. If I want to get rid of this, I can just drag my mouse to eliminate that part if I don't want to cut it. And then once I do that, then when I click on preview, I can see that this is going to be the cut line. Then over on the layers panel, I can turn my original layer back on. I can select this cut layer and just drag it straight down, and then I can take the original one and I can delete it if I no longer want it. Now note that it doesn't get rid of the print, okay? This is, Klic-N-Kut is a vector program, so I can't edit it out of the print, but I'm going to be throwing that part away anyhow. So that's something that, if this bothers you, then use something like GIMP or whatever vector or whatever raster editing program is your preference to get rid of these things to begin with. But again, if they're in here, no big deal, very easy to eliminate. The next of my favorite things is the bridge tool, and it's located over here on the tools panel, and you select it. And then primarily this was designed so that one could convert letters or whatever for a stencil application. And as you know, when you're designing a stencil, you want an opening whenever you had like what's called these child shapes inside of a design. So with the stencil bridge, you can come over here and drag and select a size. And I want to make it a bit bigger. Yeah, well, that might be a little too big. Let's make it 0.2. As you see, you can type in exactly what you want to use. And then again, if you drag over here, you can get an idea of what the size is going to be before you apply it. Then you come over and you just drag your mouse and you can, basically delete. Now, here's something that's very interesting or very helpful is that if you want it to be perfectly vertical, let's say I'm going to go right through this letter B, I can hold the Shift key when I drag and you can see it forces it to stay vertical. Or if I was dragging this direction, it would be perfectly horizontal. Or if I was going at a kind of an angle. So, here's how it snaps to 0, 45, and to 90 degrees. All right. So that's basically how that works. However, there's another application that can be very handy, and that is let's say I want to split this in half. Now, if I try to use the erase tool, there's nothing with the erase tool that will allow me to keep things perfectly horizontal or vertical, right? It's kind of a freehand kind of application. However, if I use the stencil bridge, then I can come here. I'm going to make this very small, and I'm going to use, it's funny, I used 0.026, which came from another program, and later I found out that basically 0.026 inches is the thickness of the blade. So you can't get any thinner when you're cutting than the basic thickness of the blade itself, correct? So you can set that at 0.026 and then come over, let's say I come halfway, I'm going to hold the Shift key and I can just slice right through this lettering just like that, and then select that lettering, okay, select it and go to Object, Break Apart. And when I do that, then I can now select, let's say I can select the bottom half. Well, you know what? I forgot I have to ungroup. Also ungroup. Now let's see if I can select that. Yeah, now I can. Now I can drag my mouse to select the bottom half and recolor it to, let's say I want to make that blue. Okay, so that's a way that you can kind of dissect something in half. And because if you use the knife tool is going to leave it as open shapes. You won't be able to fill it with color and have it, cut as a closed shape. It leaves everything open. So that's the one thing I like about using Stencil Bridge in order to cut things, because then I know that it's going to be a closed shape when I'm done. The next one is the crop tool. And the thing I like about the crop tool is that you can use it to basically cut away anything that you don't want anymore. So let's say I'm doing a pop-up card, and with a pop-up card you need the absolute bottom of the letters to be absolutely flat, as if you're just going to cut a horizontal line all the way through it. So with the crop tool, which is over here it's part of the knife tools, you just select knife and then you move I'm holding my mouse down and I select crop. With the crop tool, you select your design and then again select crop, and then I'm going to just start out here. I'm going to drag my mouse across, okay, and I'm still holding the mouse. I'm going to come down until I get right down to the bottom, and then I make sure it's going to cut a little part. I'm carefully looking to make sure it's going to cut off just the very bottom of every letter. I let go and then I press enter, and when I do that, it basically cuts it and makes it all the way flat right across the bottom, and then I know that that's going to work with the pop-up card. My next favorite editing tool is the Path Simplify function. So let's say I've traced this butterfly. So I select it and I'm going to go to Path Simplify, and that shows me how many nodes. So I can turn on Show Nodes and I can see that I have 416 nodes. And I'm like, wow, that's not exceedingly, 3,000's too much, right? This isn't too much, but this is a good example in terms of being able to show how you can reduce this by, more than half and not change the nature of the design. So I've got the threshold at 50, which is halfway. So I can come up here, let's try this at say 75. All right, and then click on Preview. And now that I've gone from 416 down to 234, and if you turn off the Show Nodes and you can drag this window to make it much bigger, you can really look and make sure that it hasn't compromised the integrity of your design. Everything still looks good, in other words. But being able to, basically have the number of nodes, I mean, it's not quite, but getting close, is going to make the design cut faster and smoother, and that can really make a big difference. The other thing I've noticed with some designs is that resizing the original image up makes it a little bit easier to edit down the nodes without it compromising the design. That's not always true. I tried to do some tests, I couldn't make it happen, but I know in the past it has happened. So always make your design, even if you want to cut it much smaller, make it larger to begin with, apply this function, and then resize your design down, and you should get really great results using it. My next favorite thing for editing is new in SCAL6, and it's called round corners. So you can take any particular design such as this and go to Path, Round Corners, and then you can change the radius. It's going to start with rounded, and you can make it, much wider or much more curved around, the corners, or you can make it beveled if that's the look you're going for, or you can make it a rounded inset. Now, in this case, this is very much just, kind of a design aspect. So I'm going to show you a little bit more with this one. So let's go back to rounded. And then the other thing you can do, instead of it doing all 4 corners at one time, or let's say you've got 6 corners or 8 corners or whatever, you can change and just have it do just, let's say, 2 of the corners. So the way to do that, so I have my design and I'm going to click on the shape tool to bring up the nodes. And when I do that, I can then drag and select just those 2 corners and go to Path, Round Corners. And then when I do the rounding, you'll notice that it's only affecting the 2 that I have selected. Okay, so that can be very handy too. Now for practical applications where it really is about editing, there are 2 situations in which I've noticed that people will have a problem with cutting. And that is when they're cutting something like a star shape or some shape that has the very pointy, the very pointy points on it, so one way to say it. And then also when they're cutting grass. Grass also has very pointy points on it. So this is an ideal application for round corner. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see, have a better look at it. And then when I select this, and I go to Path, Round Corners. Now, obviously, that's way too much. You've lost the design, but you can make this any size you want to. So let's try, say, 0.002. All right, now then, this is going to make a big difference. You can see that they're just barely rounded compared to before, and that changes everything when it cuts. Trust me, it will make such a difference compared to the original. And then same thing with grass. You can come over here and select the grass, and let me zoom out a little bit, back in a little bit. All right, and again, go to Path, Round Corners. Again, the default's going to be way too much, not a problem, just back off. 0.002 maybe. It's going to be something you'll probably have to experiment with. You might need to go to 0.02, make it even more. That might be better. It also, is going to be highly dependent on the material that you're cutting. So for example, a heavier cardstock is going to need more rounding than say something like vinyl. So again, you might need to make a few copies of this and then, just kind of like the little small sample test, right? And try, say, 3 different radiuses, very, very, kind of larger than, kind of bordering on larger than you want, medium, really small, cut it out and see how it goes. And the last one I want to cover is the flatten function. Now then, remember, different programs can often be using same terminology, but they mean completely different things. And that's going to be the case with Flatten. Flatten is not going to be the same as what Flatten is in, say, a program like Design Space. It's different. And that's just, every programmer is entitled to name things what they want to, just the way things are in life. So when I click on Preview, you'll notice that in this design, everything is overlapping. All right, so even though I'm going to be cutting these things, obviously from different colors of whatever material, let's say HTV, I don't want to be layering it. That's one of the things that, people tend to be very specific about when they're using HTV is that they want these things to be cut out from one another. So having it like this is not going to be good. But you can fix it all in one step now. As of SCAL6, you can select the entire design and go to Path, Flatten. And when you do that, then you'll notice in the preview that you no longer see all those overlaps. And indeed, if you come up and you kind of move these things away from one another, you can see where the letters got cut out of the hat, for the ho, because the ho layer is on top. And same thing for down here, it cut these layers out. And then if you expand the layers here, let's open up, say, the group, and let's just select just the hat. And then when I move the hat away, again, it also, has the white layer cut away from the red layer. So, and it just kind of does it, you want everything kind of layered to begin with, but you do because you make sure it looks like the way you want it to be. And then you apply the flatten, and then it just basically cuts out from each layer below that particular layer anything that's overlapping. So this concludes my video on my favorite editing functions. If you have questions about any of these, please let me know. Thank you for watching.